On today's show, the Houston Rockets are at risk of missing out on some of the top-tier coaches available on the market because they're sitting idly by and doing nothing. Why? They need to start being proactive instead of inactive. Plus, we'll take a look at Houston Rockets general manager Rafael Stone's exclusive interview with The Athletic and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. As always, appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, in the gym, on your lunch break. Thank you for making LOR part of your day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. Today, we're going to dive into the Rockets' potential head coaching search and how that may or may not already be impacted by other teams around the association and at the risks that the Rockets are at by not being more proactive in that regard right now. We'll take a look at Rafael Stone's exclusive interview with The Athletic, some of the interesting things that he had to say there, as well as a couple tidbits about the NBA draft and how it might, some recent developments that might impact the Houston Rockets as it relates to their draft strategy moving forward. But let's start with the coaching stuff because the Atlanta Hawks fired Nate McMillan. Shocker. Apparently you are allowed to fire NBA head coaches. Who'da thunk? And, I remember thinking about when it happened, I was like, I don't know what the precedent is for firing a head coach this late in the season, but it's basically like Atlanta wanted to get the ball rolling on figuring out who their next right head coach was going to be. And now, having officially moved on from Nate McMillan, they are able to go out and officially start conducting a head coaching search, right? They had a short list of candidates, Bucks assistant Charles Lee, Kings assistant Jordy Fernandez, Warriors assistant Kenny Atkinson. There's one of the names that we've talked about here for the Houston Rockets. Spurs assistant Mitch Johnson, G League South Bay's Miles Simon, I apologize, and former Jazz coach Quinn Snyder. That's another name, right? Some of the top tier coaches available on the market in Quinn Snyder and Kenny Atkinson. And the Hawks are interviewing them, right? And it sounds like, from everything we've heard, the talks are picking up heavily with Quinn Snyder. And maybe Quinn Snyder would have been a pipe dream for this Houston Rockets team, but the fact that the Rockets aren't even going to get an interview with him is concerning, right? The Hawks are doing what the Rockets should be doing, which is being proactive in looking for their next head coach. I feel very safe in saying that we have established Stephen Silas is not that guy at this point, right? Where's my clip? I've got the clip somewhere here. Where is it?
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
There we go. Like, in 2.5 years, I cannot sit here and concretely say there's any one thing that Stephen Silas does good as a head coach. And I can say that there's a lot of things he does poorly as a head coach. And I'm not going to attribute it to, he doesn't have a right roster or whatever. We've gone down this rabbit hole about what Stephen Silas can and can't do as a head coach at this point. And right now, if Silas is the head coach of this Rockets team next year, there are major concerns about the organization moving forward. If they can't identify that they need an upgrade at the head coaching spot to be a materially better team next season. So, and I will say one of the answers that Stone gave in his exclusive interview about Silas, we'll pick that apart, maybe read between the lines a little bit on that as far as Stephen Silas' future is concerned. But right now, the Rockets can't conduct a head coaching search, right? You can't do that when you have an active head coach. You can't actively go out and start, hey, you keep doing your thing, but we're going to interview all these other people, right? You need to move on and have an interim. and then you can conduct a formal search, right? So the Hawks are getting a leg up on everybody else. Any of the other 29 teams that might be looking to move on from their head coach and upgrade at that position, upgrade on the sidelines this offseason, the Hawks are doing it already. They're conducting these interviews, and they're going to have their head coaching situation figured out maybe even before the end of the season, which would be insane, right? The Rockets should take a page from their book because it's a two-part thing. Not only could you maybe see some incremental improvement this season from letting a guy from maybe letting John Lucas take over the reins for the final 24 games, or preferably you get a look at Mahmoud Abdel-Fattah and you give him a chance to run the show. And maybe you have something there. Maybe he's the Rockets version of Nick Nurse, right? I mean, RGV association, all that, but right, maybe he's the Rockets version of Mark Daigneault, right? Comes up through the G League system, works for the G League affiliate, gets brought in as an assistant, and then takes over the team, right? There might be something there, and you won't really get a chance to know if you just pass over him and get to this offseason and then hire the next guy, right? You might have missed out on a gem in Abdel-Fattah. So give him a chance to coach the team over these final 24 games or so. See if there's something there. Maybe there is, right? Maybe there's something there, and then maybe you're not. Maybe you do miss out on some of the top names in the coaching free agency market this offseason, right? Maybe Quinn Snyder goes to Atlanta, Kenny Atkinson stays with the Warriors, Ime Udoka is off doing whatever Ime does, right? Like maybe you miss out on some of these big names. But if you strike gold here at home with Abdel-Fattah and he's a noticeable upgrade to Silas, then maybe you stick it out with him. Maybe you give him a year or two to kind of run the show and see what he might be able to unlock. There's potential there, but you don't get it. You won't see it unless you actually get a chance to take the risk and see what it, again, at this point, 24 games left in the season. I don't see any harm that could be done in handing the reins over to Abdel-Fattah. In fact, I think it would actually prepare this young Rockets group to understand, hey, the way that things have been happening under Steven Silas are not going to continue to happen, right? We have a level of expectations, and those have not been met, and we want to prepare you guys for the next voice that is going to come in here and have drastically different expectations of you than the voice that you've been accustomed to hearing for the last 2.5 years. So you can switch it up. You can get the players more comfortable with a different voice. You get a look at Abdel-Fattah. And then on top of all of that, again, you can actually start conducting a head coaching search formally, right? You can reach out to teams officially. You can ask for permission to interview these assistants and other potential head coaching, other potential head coaches. But you have to just cut ties. And at this point, it very much feels like what the Rockets are going to do is just let things run to the end of the season, and then they'll start the head coaching search. And by then, again, looks like Quinn Snyder might be headed to Atlanta already. Who knows how many other teams might go ahead and cut ties with their head coaches and start their head coaching searches before the Houston Rockets do. Or, here's the other thing, when you want to talk about a competitive advantage, if the Rockets and 4 other teams all move on from their head coaches within a week of each other and start interviewing all these candidates, you're going to be doing it at the same time as everybody else, right? Rather than if you did it now, you would have a month-and-a-half head start on all these other teams, just the way the Atlanta Hawks are doing it. So credit to Atlanta for being proactive in their head coaching search. I hope that the Rockets take a page out of their book and realize that they need as much of a competitive edge to try and secure one of these top-tier coaching names this offseason. And the sooner they start getting a look at these guys, the sooner they start these discussions, the better. Because as we talked about in a recent podcast with co-host Ben Dubose, I kind of had it mapped out where they might not actually sign a head coach until like after the draft lottery or like in the lead up to the NBA draft, but it might actually be better for them to do it sooner and have the coaching situation completely ironed out, figured out, taken care of, and have that answer resolved before the NBA draft lottery even hits, right? That's a way to really inspire some confidence with the fan base, to kind of rejuvenate fans and have people understand, hey, there is a sense of direction moving forward. We know what we're doing. We understand what we want to accomplish next year, and here are the steps, and here's the first step in the process of doing so, right? We're gonna be competitive next year. We want to be a better team next year. We're hiring this head coach because we think he's the guy who can take us there. But waiting to do that and prolonging the inevitable with Steven Silas does nobody any favors, right? It's just dragging things out with Silas. It's just dragging things out for the players. It's just prolonging the head coaching search, all of that. To me, right now, there are no downsides to moving on from Silas, and then figuring out who the next guy is going to be, because it's clearly not him at this point. So with that, coming up, I do want to dive into Rafael Stone's exclusive interview with The Athletic. We'll pick out a few of the interesting things that he had to say there, as well as coming up, we'll take a look at some of the recent going-ons in the NBA landscape and how the implications might impact the Houston Rockets. Russell Westbrook signing with the LA Clippers could be a stealth tank operation impacting the Houston Rockets Clippers pick swap that they own. We'll talk about all that coming up in just a moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Alperen Sengun to have more than 20.5 points? What about KJ Martin to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Jabari Smith Jr. to have less than 3.5 three-pointers? Still hasn't quite found his shot, unfortunately. What about Tate Washington to have less than 2.5 turnovers? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, you name it, they've got you covered over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They're safe. They offer incredibly fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON to sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Quick reminder that if you have not yet done your spiritual duties yet for the day, make sure you go.
Pray for Victor.
Gotta pray for Victor every single day. Hashtag pray for Victor. Let's go ahead and dive into this exclusive interview, General Manager Rafael Stone with The Athletic's Kelly Iko. And I think a couple of the answers were kind of interesting. I've got a few that I want to highlight here. And the article really well written, always, love great work from Kelly as always, but let's go ahead and dive straight in. So question, despite the record, what about the team's play for the first 2/3 of the season has encouraged you? Alternatively, what has disappointed you and what has intrigued you? Answer, it's not very linear. There was a stretch where we were really competitive, late November, early December, playing really well against good teams. That was good to see. We've been consistently a really good rebounding team. That's good to know about this mix of guys. There's actually something that they can do. And then a ton of stuff is TBD. We need to be a better shooting team. That's obvious. Some of that just feels like it's just confidence, guys knowing when their shots are coming and everything else. Hopefully that's one of the things that we see over the last 20 games or so, people starting to figure that out. I think we have a group that on an individual basis can shoot. How do we get that to translate more on the court? One of the things we talked about coming into the year was seeing what it would look like if we played through Alpi. And as the season progressed, we were able to see that a little bit. And I think that's intriguing. There's a lot to unpack from that one. So let's go, we'll go through and we'll go line by line. I will agree. I do think it's encouraging that the Rockets are a good rebounding team. However, they're a good rebounding team at the expense of their transition defense, right? There's a reason the Rockets crush the offensive glass. It's because they never get back in transition, right? They're sending 2, 3, sometimes 4 guys at the offensive glass, and they are giving up a mountain of transition points because of that. So some good, a lot of bad. So that's first point. On the point about being a better shooting team, and that it comes down to guys knowing when their shots are coming and everything else. Maybe. Hear me out. Maybe. If you were to draw up some plays for your number 3 overall pick and have him understand, hey, like, I'm going to get you some consistent looks and we're going to run some actions for you so you can feel involved in the offense. And that's not just Jabari, that's everybody in the offense, right? The Rockets offense is so up and down. Guys, right, you might get 3 shots one game, and then you might get 15 shots the next game. That level of inconsistency is concerning, right? And it does really throw guys off. And I do think a lot of the time, guys don't understand like when they're going to actually get shots within the Rockets offense, right? There's not a tried and true system in place of, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to execute this action. The pass is going to go to one of 2 spots. Like executing certain reads within the Rockets offense just doesn't happen. So yeah, I mean, I agree with the idea that it's a confidence issue, right? And I think there are guys on this team who probably can shoot, but one of the symptoms of Silas and the current Rockets offense is guys don't understand when they're actually going to get the ball, right? They don't know when their next shot is going to be, and that leads to, at times, some selfish tendencies, right? Like we talked about it earlier this season, right? Jabari would, sometimes he'd go through an entire game where, go through an entire half, we got like 3 shot attempts. And then, the very next time he touches the ball, he's like, okay, I'm not passing it, I'm going to shoot it, right? Because he doesn't know when he's going to get the ball back again. There's not structure. Needs to be structure, right? It's too free-flowing. It's too read and react, all this for these young guys. So, next thing he says is he talks about one of the things that earlier this year they talked about what it would look like playing through Alperen Sengun. And as the season, he says, as the season progressed, we're able to see that a little bit. And I think it's intriguing. So first off, it is very clear. Yes, they talked about Alperen Sengun earlier this season, and they decided to bench him for Bruno Fernando. Which again, at the time, the only reason I defended it, just so that I can clarify for anybody who wants to call me out on this, the only reason I defended it was the argument that if the Rockets aren't going to lean into what Sengun does as a player, if they're not going to run the shin hub offense with him as the starter, bring him off the bench and let him do it in the second unit, right? Basically, let Jalen, let Kevin do the lob threat stuff with Bruno in the first unit, cool, whatever. When Sengun subs in, change the style of play to match his strengths, right? We didn't even see that, unfortunately. He subbed in and he was still just being made a rim runner. So with that, the only reason we saw shin hub, and we haven't seen it recently, right? The Rockets have gone away from it again. The only reason we saw it was an injury to Kevin Porter Jr. Had Kevin Porter Jr. never been injured, I highly doubt we would have actually ever really gotten a look at what the offense could be when run through Alperen Sengun as heavily as it was. So this just adds more fuel to the fire that the Rockets front office does not believe in Alperen Sengun. They just don't. And it's concerning. Like, he's flashed so much talent, and yet they time and time again, they're just like, they downplay his strengths, right? He looks like a future star when you give him the rock and let him do things. And unfortunately, as of late, we haven't seen that as much. The spacing has been garbage. There's a lot of issues surrounding the current team that are preventing the Rockets from doing that. But on top of it, it's just, they're just not getting him the ball anymore, right? Guys are playing selfishly with it. We saw Jae'Sean Tate take over the OKC game the other night. We got the Tate special. It was pretty whack. So it's been frustrating for sure. And I don't like this kind of spinning of the narrative of, oh yeah, we took a look at it and it's kind of interesting. It's like, well, no, you only did it because you had no choice, right? So that's frustrating. I wasn't a big fan of that. Next question. Between yourself and the rest of the front office and ownership, how would you all evaluate yourselves over the first phase of this rebuild, 3 seasons in? What's the self-reflection process like? Answer. When we came into it, we didn't really have talent on the roster. We didn't have any cap space. We didn't have any draft picks. We now have been able to recoup our draft picks. We have more cap space this summer than anybody else, and I think we have a very talented roster. The process of trying to achieve those 3 goals, which were for sure our biggest goals, has been challenging and at times very painful. But I do think we addressed those goals. I think you said it's part 1, and I think that's right. And succeeding in part 1 doesn't mean you'll succeed in part 2. We need to translate those things into a team that becomes competitive and hopefully starts winning and winning big over time. And that's the challenge in front of us starting this summer, but continuing on. And that's the challenge starting in front of us starting the summer, but continuing on. It's something that is going to happen just in one summer, I don't believe. It's not something that's going to happen in just one summer, I don't believe. Sorry, I'm all over the place. Usually my reading comprehension is a lot better than this. Totally biffed it at the end of that paragraph. I agree with this answer. And I think this is actually more or less where I find myself, is in the grand scale of things, in the big picture, in the macro view of how the Rockets have handled the rebuild. I think they accomplished those 3 things, right? Those 3 things were they didn't have talent, they didn't have cap space, they didn't have draft picks. They still don't have as many draft picks as some of the other rebuilding organizations out there, right? The Thunder have a gigantic leg up on the Rockets. The Jazz are flush with picks now. The Spurs have their own picks and are kind of working their way up by accruing picks from other organizations. So the Rockets don't necessarily have like a competitive advantage in the pick market, but they've recouped some assets there, and they have talent on the roster, and they've got a ton of cap space to play with this summer. That's about as good a position as you can put yourself in to take that leap back into relevancy. So I do agree from the macro view, 10,000-foot view, the Rockets are actually in a really good spot. It has been painful, though. The day-to-day has felt awful. The games have felt awful. The grinds of these, worst season, worst team in the NBA first year, worst team in the NBA second season, about to be the worst team in the NBA 3 years in a row. These have been painful seasons with a lot of losing, and that does wear on these guys. So the day-to-day has been tough, but in the big picture, things have actually kind of worked out the way that they needed to. It's whether or not they nail these next big steps, right? Big step, cap space. Big step, hire a competent head coach. Big step, figure out what you're doing with all the draft capital, right? Are you trading for a star? Are you actually going to draft those picks? What are you doing with these next moves, right? Are you going to trade some of the talent that's on the roster, right? You've amassed all this talent. What are you going to do with it? Figuring out those next steps, that's part 2 of the rebuild, and that's where we're really going to be able to judge this front office and figure out, are they setting the organization up for future long-term success, or are they going to make some moves that set the organization back 3 to 5 years, a la the Russell Westbrook-Chris Paul swap, which the Rockets are still trying to recover from. And then further down the way, he does mention Stephen Silas. So the question is, you've always maintained confidence in Stephen Silas, had numerous conversations over the past 3 years and seem to be on the same page. What are those talks like now? More of the same, figuring out the best course of action moving forward? Answer. Yeah, it's the same. Stephen's a really smart guy who's a really good human being, and we want the same thing. The thing I try and do during the season is just be as helpful to him as possible. If he's looking for ideas, I try to give him 50. They might all be bad, but if I give him 50, maybe one is really worth exploring. And just to make sure I'm a resource, basically a resource available to him. These seasons are really hard and really long. I just want to be as good a resource as I can. So, at no point in this answer was there any vote of confidence in Silas moving forward. Was there no, he's our guy, he's not going anywhere. And look, I get it. A lot of these types of articles from a GM are going to be a lot of non-answers. But for a guy who's been continually on the hot seat throughout the past 2 seasons, and that Rockets fans are chomping at the bit to get rid of, the GM could have snuffed that out with a 2-sentence explanation. Yeah, Stephen's our coach moving forward. He's not going anywhere. We have the utmost confidence in him. We love what he's doing, all of that. Any of those would have worked as an answer, right? Didn't give any of that, right? It's basically just, yeah, he's a really good guy, and we want the same thing. And I try to help him out as much as possible. So reading between the lines there on that answer, I think Stephen Silas is as good as gone, personally. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. I don't know. You let me know in the YouTube comments. I read all those every single day, so share your thoughts with me in the YouTube comments. But coming up, do you want to talk about the Brandon Miller incident and how that might impact his draft stock and how that relates to the Houston Rockets' potential interest in him and what they might do at the top of the draft, as well as Russell Westbrook signing with the LA Clippers and how that might help the Rockets hurt the Clippers pick. We're going to get there in just one moment, but first, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories that usually comes along with it, you've got to try Built Bar, because with Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious, you don't even think that they're good for you. What makes Built so good? Well, every bar is covered in 100% chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, strawberry, raspberry, my personal favorite, coconut brownie chunk, salted caramel, cookies and cream. Really, the list goes on and on and on. And what's crazy is they basically taste like a candy bar that's jam-packed with protein. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein in every single bar. And here's the cool part. If you don't want to order them online, if you don't want to wait to ship, whatever, you can walk into your nearest Sam's Club or Walmart and just grab a box right off the shelf. It's that easy. But if online is more your speed, go to Built.com, check them out, Built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your very next order of the best tasting protein bars on the market. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off at Built.com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, if you haven't seen the story about Brandon Miller yet, which, God, is crazy. We just talked about him on the podcast and did his draft profile. Basically, try to summarize this as much as possible. A friend of his, a teammate actually, left a gun in Brandon Miller's car, and he went to deliver it to him at a nightclub late at night. And it was there at the club that another mutual friend, I believe, was told about the location of the gun, took the gun, and shot someone with it. So that's as quick a summary as I can give. And the whole situation is very messy because there are people arguing both sides of the situation. There are people saying that Brandon Miller did absolutely nothing wrong and he is completely innocent, whatever. And then there's people who are saying that he is, totally to blame, whatever, that this is completely his fault, all that. Why would you bring a gun to a nightclub this late at night? Why would, that he, whatever, all of it. I find myself somewhere in the middle where like the entire situation is messy. Was it a dumb decision? Absolutely. All of this, right? And somebody was killed, right? It's horrible. But what does this mean for Brandon Miller's future is the question, right? As this relates to his draft stock, I mean, is this the type of thing that is going to tank his draft stock, right? So far, there's no evidence that suggests Brandon Miller had any idea what was going to happen when he arrived with the gun. It was basically just like, hey, I left my gun in your car. Can you come bring it to me? And he's like, oh God, I don't want this. Yeah, sure. Like, sure, I'll bring it to you. College town, probably wasn't far away, whatever. Like, just situationally, is it weird to deliver a gun in the early hours of the morning to a nightclub? Yeah. But if you're already awake and you're nearby and your friend's just like, yeah, I want it back. And if you don't want it in your car, then sure, right? So I'm not making excuses for whatever. I think the entire situation is stupid, and it is very, very messy. But what does this do for Miller's draft stock, right? I mean, in my book, I had him as a lock for being a top 5 pick. Is this the type of situation that does it paint a cloud over Miller as a player, right? Are there suddenly concerns about any other off-court stuff that he might be getting into or getting involved with, right? Is this the first in a series of incidents, right? Is there going to be a continued pattern here of concerning trends from Brandon Miller? Honestly, I mean, this is the first type of anything like this that we've heard about. And again, from the information that we have in the story, it doesn't sound like he knew the intent behind what they wound up doing with the gun. So maybe this is going to be something that just blows over and in a month we're not even going to remember it or it will completely forget about it. Or maybe this is something that closer to the NBA draft gets revisited and maybe more evidence comes out and suddenly there's a court case and it's taken a trial and all sorts of. So this is something that's going to potentially impact what the Houston Rockets do at the top of the draft, right? Like, I mean, if the Rockets landed at pick number 3, I was ready to say all in on Brandon Miller at pick number 3 and be comfortable with that pick. Now, I mean, if Brandon Miller's stock drops, like if teams are passing on him because they're concerned about him, I mean, he might be the kind of guy that you could snag, I don't know, late lottery, middle of the first round, depending on how hard of a hit he takes, right? Depending on what other information comes out about this case. So it's something worth paying attention to. It's worth noting Brandon Miller did respond, like in the immediate aftermath of this story surfacing, he responded and dropped 41 points in a really, really stellar performance. So, I mean, clearly he's trying to just block it out and focus on his game, and people are still incredibly impressed by what he's doing on the court. Even Tari Eason jumped on Twitter and talked about his response to everything, and then Rockets fans bullied Tari Eason into deleting the tweet apparently. So it's been a whole discussion point, right? At this point, I'm not ready to lean one way or the other. It's kind of just be in a holding pattern, right? And wait and see, and see what happens closer to the NBA draft, closer to the lottery, whatever. See if more news comes out. But it's worth noting and it's worth paying attention to and how that impacts what the Rockets may do at the top of the draft with their pick. Now, that also does segue us into the conversation about the LA Clippers pick, because the Clippers are bringing in good old friend Russell Westbrook. And I cannot fathom why they think Russ is going to... Actually, I can't. There is one reason for why I think they're bringing in Russ, and it's because Paul George and Kawhi Leonard miss a lot of games. They do. And the Clippers are like, 14-9, 15-9. They're basically close to 500 when one of those guys is missing a game. And they're even worse than that when, I think they were like, last I checked, they were like 2-8 when both of those guys miss games or something like that. So bringing in Russ elevates your floor as a team. Russ is not a guy who elevates your ceiling. He's just not the type of player that makes a good team better. It's not how it works. But what he is a guy that will drag a bad team up to a certain degree of, I don't want to say respectability, but just when you produce at the level he can produce, the efficiency doesn't necessarily matter. He's just going to single-handedly win you some games because he's able to rack up numbers, right? If you get good Russ in a given game, he can win you that game pretty much by himself sometimes. So the Clippers are probably signing Russ because I'm assuming Paul George pushed really hard for it, and they'll be able to use him for the rest of the season in the games where PG or Kawhi or both are missing time. And for Russ, I'm sure there was a little bit of like, okay, he doesn't have to relocate. He's already in LA. He just gets to grab his stuff from the Lakers locker room and throw it into the Clippers locker room, whatever. The situation probably just made sense for him rather than relocating to, Charlotte or Chicago or any of the other teams or Miami, any of the other teams that, might have been looking into him. For the Rockets, though, I kind of like it because Russ is the human embodiment of volatility in a player, right? Russ might single-handedly lose the Clippers some games with his bad play. And for the Rockets, who own the rights to swap picks with the Clippers, that's fantastic. You just know that Eric Gordon is so excited to have good old teammate Russell Westbrook back over there.
Oh my.
I don't want to sit here and rag on Russ and the Clippers too much. It's just a very perplexing decision, right? The Clippers made some really good moves at the deadline. They picked up Eric Gordon. They picked up Bones Highland. They picked up Mason Plumlee. They made some really solid acquisitions, and they've, started to kind of coalesce and look really good as a group. They're easily one of the deepest teams in the entire NBA, if not the deepest team. And for them to mess that up with Russ, right? Potential locker room dynamics, whatever, if he's not playing or if he's not getting the minutes that he thinks he's warranted. Now, if he comes in and he just basically does the same thing he was doing for the Lakers, which is be a super sub off the bench and check in and play Russ ball for 20, 25 minutes a night and just try and keep the Clippers bench afloat while PG and Kawhi are getting their breathers, maybe that's the best case scenario for them. But I don't see a world where Russ is playing meaningful playoff minutes for this Clippers team down the line. So by and large, it's just a very confusing signing. So it does impact the Rockets, though. It's worth noting, paying attention to where the Clippers pick currently stands, all that good stuff. In fact, I actually want to see where they currently float at. Let's see. Let's figure out where that Clippers pick is hiding at for Houston. Currently, at the time of this recording, the Pickers clip is 20th in the draft. So a little bit better than it was at the time of the trade, but it could dip a little bit lower, right? Again, I think it's going to land somewhere in that 15 to 20 range. As close to the lottery as possible would be really, really great for Houston. So maybe Russ will lose the Clippers some games, and maybe the Rockets will be able to reap the benefits of those rewards. But that's going to do it for today's episode. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts on the coaching situation. Let me know your thoughts on the, answers, the questions from Rafael Stone's exclusive interview, and give me your thoughts on everything. Just, I love the comments. I read through those every single day. I love hearing from you guys. So with that, appreciate you for checking out the show. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.